Good afternoon, everybody. So nice to have you here joining us for our first teach-in of April 2025. My name is Lisa Marshall. I am the Director of Organizing and Advocacy with New Yorkers for Clean Power. And we have a really exciting teach-in for you today that we're really looking forward to sharing with you. We often hear people ask when we talk about the New York Heat Act, we're going to transition off gas and electrify buildings. How does that exactly work? Who's going to pay for it? What actually happens? And do we know that this is going to work? So we're going to answer some of those questions for you today by highlighting an amazing new report that done by Switchbox and commissioned by the Alliance for a Green Economy. And we're going to kick us off. Next slide, please, actually, Lorenzo. We're going to kick off with Jessica Azulay from Alliance for Green Economy, who is going to describe to us a little bit about the history of the gas system, how we have been treating the gas system in New York in a regulatory way, and what led us to this date, and what the alternatives might be, and what the future might look like. And then we'll have a short pause for Q&A. Then we're going to have Juan-Pablo Velez of Switchbox presenting on this exciting new report that's going to really show in detail how beneficial this transition can be and how it can be paid for. Then we'll have Q&A for both Jessica and Juan-Pablo. During Juan-Pablo's presentation, though, he is going to welcome you to ask questions and pause him during the presentation. We don't usually do that here at our NYCP teach-ins, but we're going to try it today, and I think you'll enjoy it. And then don't leave early, because at the end we're going to take action together, and we have a bunch of actions queued up for you. So without any further ado, I'd love to introduce Jessica Azulay. For those of you who do not know her, she is the incredible, amazing, brilliant Executive Director of Alliance for a Green Economy, also known as AGREE. And let's just take it to the next slide and take it away, Jessica.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for coming on today and being here. You can just go to the next slide, Lorenzo. So just very quickly about Alliance for a Green Economy. We are a statewide organization focused on energy policy in New York and moving New York to a green economy and transitioning our economy and our energy system to 100% renewable energy in the electric sector, the heating sector, and transportation. And we're headquartered in Syracuse, New York. Next slide. So before I dive into a little bit about, how we can transition off of gas infrastructure and what the alternatives look like and what's the state of play, I wanted to show this video that was that highlights a project that Con Ed is in the process of doing, because I think this is going to kind of demonstrate what is possible here. So if you could play the video. Oh, and now we cannot hear the sound of the video.
See this line? Live from Pix Plaza on 42nd Street. It's the Pix 11 News at 5. See this line? It's actually the border between the Bronx and Mount Vernon. How that allowed this homeowner to get all of her appliances replaced to electric for free, and how it can affect your utility bill potentially.
Well, here's something that'll grab your attention. All new high-efficiency appliances for free.
Okay.
Thanks to Con Ed.
But some customers are skeptical. They want to know, is it really going to save them money? Pix 11's James Ford is in Yonkers right now. For some, I heard it's electric, James.
All of this is where work crews are replacing a natural gas line, but all of this is actually more expensive than what some people in this program receive. It may look like she's boiling an egg like she does every morning.
I love it.
But what you see Bernice Jones doing is also a radical change to her home, her community, and the environment.
I was like a little skeptical about the whole thing, and especially when they said, you know, it would be free.
Yes, free. She's talking about a program called Electric Advantage, in which Con Ed replaced nearly all of her appliances with state-of-the-art electric ones. That stove, for instance, uses induction technology to heat things.
It's much better than my gas stove. It's no heat, so it's no longer hot in the kitchen.
That's just the beginning. This electric water heater replaced her old boiler, and in 4 rooms, she got heat pumps. The program also did this, completely insulated her 2-family home. This is the border separating Mount Vernon from the Bronx. And because she lives at the end of an old natural gas line in the Bronx, it made her eligible.
It's actually beneficial for the utility to encourage these types of things over time because it is expensive to replace big pipelines.
Columbia Climate School energy expert Melissa Lott explains why utilities do this. In Ms. Jones's case, all new electric appliances were cheaper than replacing the old gas line that ran to the Bronx border.
But it's all over the country. These types of trends are coming up, but Con Ed is still leading on a lot of it.
Only a few hundred customers are eligible for its program, but it's providing incentives for you to get many of the things Ms. Jones got.
That are available to all customers. So this is a great example that, homes like this, older homes, this is really good for them.
Con Ed says the home insulation she got is the most helpful for energy efficiency, but everything she received, there are those financial incentives for. You can learn more at coned.com/clean heat. Reporting from Yonkers, I'm James Ford, Pix 11 News.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Lorenzo, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that amazing video and showing that it's possible to pay for heat pumps with the avoided cost of gas infrastructure. And I wanted to just dive in a little bit about why this is happening, how we got to the point of utilities like Con Ed doing projects like this. So this type of concept is 10 years in the making, at least in New York. In 2014, the New York Public Service Commission started a process called Reforming the Energy Vision. And the idea of that process was to figure out how we can avoid large, expensive infrastructure investments by making investments in more cost-effective, less expensive distributed energy resources. REV was mostly focused on the electric system. So the alternatives that they were looking at were electric efficiency and solar to avoid large electric infrastructure upgrades. And this type of project was called a non-wires alternative. But as you know, New York has a very strong anti-fracking movement that was pushing to ban fracking in New York and ultimately won a ban on fracking in New York. And so anti-fracking activists in New York were looking at the pipeline system and how we're spending so much money expanding gas infrastructure in New York. And it didn't take long for activists to push the Public Service Commission and utilities to imply the same concepts of non-wire alternatives to the gas system. And so thus was born the concept of a non-pipe alternative. And the first non-pipe alternatives were conceived by NYSEG and Con Ed around 2017. Okay, next slide. And since then, this has continued to develop, this concept, by utilities and parties that intervene at the Public Service Commission and the Public Service Commission. And now there are many types of non-pipe alternative projects. And I'm going to talk about a couple main ones. One is a project that seeks to reduce demand so that you can avoid new interstate pipelines or new gas expansion projects. So the goal of this type of non-pipe alternative is to keep gas demand flat or going down by offsetting any new customers that come onto the system, by reducing gas demand elsewhere through energy efficiency or getting customers heat pumps. And by doing this, you can maybe avoid having to bring a new gas pipeline into the state or gas expansion projects to expand the gas system capacity in a specific area. And to do this, you need often large numbers of customers to participate by doing energy efficiency or electrifying with heat pumps, but not everyone in a certain area has to participate or needs to fully electrify. You're just trying to reduce gas demand, basically. Another type of project is targeted electrification, and this is what we're going to dive into a little bit more deeply today. And the purpose of a targeted electrification project is to be able to retire a specific piece of gas pipeline. For instance, a small segment in a neighborhood. So in order to do that, you have to transition every single household that relies on that pipeline off of gas so that the pipeline is no longer needed. And so for that, you need all the customers to participate, and you need them to completely take gas out of their homes and completely electrify with heat pumps or switch to a thermal energy network. And then there's another type of non-pipe alternative that utilities have been pursuing, which I call non-traditional supply. And this is a pretty controversial type of non-pipe alternative. The idea is to avoid a large gas investment with a smaller, less permanent gas investment. So they're looking for a more cost-effective way to meet gas demand without entrenching long-term gas investment. And sometimes they do this through trucking compressed natural gas, for instance. So these are the types of non-pipe alternatives that utilities have been pursuing. And they can be done in combination with each other. There's lots of different variations on this. Next slide. And just very quickly, the state of play for this type of project right now in New York is a patchwork. Utilities individually have frameworks for non-pipe alternatives and have made commitments to pursue non-pipe alternatives and are attempting to pursue them. There's a long-term gas proceeding in New York that's attempting to unify gas planning and the non-pipe alternative frameworks. But really specific gas infrastructure battles are still happening one by one in rate cases and in the individual gas planning processes by utilities. And there are some major barriers to all these types of non-pipe alternatives. For instance, utilities are still required to be able to expand the gas system as new customers want to connect through the 100-foot rule, which is in public service law, which gives people the first 100 feet of gas infrastructure for free. And through the utilities' obligation to serve gas, utilities are required to keep giving people gas unless customers all voluntarily agree to electrify or switch to a thermal energy network. So one customer on a gas line, for instance, can stop a targeted electrification project. And then there's, general lack of understanding of this concept and planning. So as a result, we have a huge missed opportunities and a big waste of money, which I know Juan-Pablo is going to get into a little bit more. Next slide. So what can we do? And we'll talk about this more in the take action. Passing the New York Heat Act is a big priority for us because it really creates a better planning framework to make sure non-pipe alternatives will move forward and gives the Public Service Commission the ability to move them forward by changing the 100-foot rule and the obligation to serve gas. Many of us, and we invite you to join us, are advocating at the Public Service Commission in the gas planning proceeding and in rate cases, really pushing for more commitments for non-pipe alternatives by utilities. And then, just socializing the concept of the non-pipe alternative through videos like the one about Con Ed that we shared and through presentations like this. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Juan-Pablo, who's going to talk about, actually, I think I'm going to take a couple of questions and then I'm going to pass it over to Juan-Pablo.
Yes. And Lorenzo, if you wouldn't mind just unsharing your screen while we do a little Q&A. That was a lot of information in a short period of time, but it's nice for us to see each other's faces while we do a few questions, and then we'll turn it to Juan Pablo. Lorenzo, can you unshare? There we go. Okay. All right. Questions for Jessica. Dave wants to know if there's links or docket numbers and dates for utility commission decisions. Yes, we can get those to you, but not right this minute, I think is the right answer for that.
Yeah, and I think we'll be sharing this presentation afterwards with everybody. And I did put the gas planning docket number in there. But yes, we can share more in email as follow-up.
And one of the take actions at the end, a little preview, is about the National Grid gas planning, because there's hearings actually this week and next week, and there's going to be an in-person event in the city that we'll invite you to join. Simon wants to know how much, roughly in billions, are the New York utilities planning to spend over the next several years to replace leak-prone pipe?
Hold that question. Juan-Pablo is going to dive deep into that momentarily.
Okay. Patricia said, our reps blame the New York State CLCPA for raising electric bills. That's more of a comment, but do you want to address that?
Yeah, I can address that a little bit. I think there's a lot of myths about the CLCPA and how it's impacting our energy bills, but the reality is that we are mostly still spending money on the status quo and business as usual. And Juan-Pablo is going to dive into this a little bit more. We are spending billions of dollars on gas infrastructure, and we need to turn that around. We are spending very little money on addressing climate change. And so I think Juan-Pablo's presentation will dive into that a little bit more, but we can share some information afterwards. There have been some filings on how much the CLCPA is impacting our utility bills, and it's not very much, but nothing compared to gas expansion and continuing to replace gas infrastructure.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica. I think we will take more questions for Jessica later, but we really want to thank you so much for sort of teaching us how we got here and what's going on, and showing us that great video, which really, I think, is something that if you haven't seen it before, the link is in the chat. You can share that with your assembly member and tell them, hey, have you seen this video? We could do this for lots of people if we pass New York Heat. But let's unspotlight Jessica. Let's spotlight Juan-Pablo. And Juan-Pablo, you can share your screen when you are ready, and we'll go to you with the findings of your shiny new report. Can we spotlight Juan-Pablo, please? And if you're talking, JP, we can't hear you. You're muted. There you go.
Thank you. I couldn't find the unmute button. Thanks everybody so much for having me. My name is Juan-Pablo Velez. I'm the executive director of a think tank called Switchbox that tends to run the numbers and all the climate and energy policy that we talk about so much, so we can kind of see how what it all adds up to. And today I'm going to be going through a report that we published very recently about one very specific flavor of non-pipeline alternative. Because as Jessica mentioned, there are many. And let's get into it. This first part, I'm just going to go through the first section, and then I'll take questions at the end. Then we'll do a deep dive. And during the deep dive, as questions come up for clarification, please go ahead and ask them. So let's talk about leak-prone distribution pipelines, and we'll kind of parse what that means exactly. So a distribution pipeline is the gas pipeline that runs down your block to bring gas to your house if you're not in the country. That's contrasted with the transmission pipe, which are the big ones that go from state to state. And leak prone doesn't necessarily mean it's leaking. What it actually means is it's made of old metal. These days, they don't really make natural gas pipes out of metal because they tend to corrode and leak over time. But the gas system was built over the last 100 years, and so there's a lot of this old metal pipe in the ground, and it does sometimes spring leaks, and that's bad because sometimes things go boom. And also methane, which is what natural gas is, has 80 times the warming potential of CO2 over a couple decades. So methane leaks are definitely something we want to address. Leak-prone pipeline replacement is the idea that you dig up the entire pipe and replace it with a completely new plastic pipe. So in a way, it's the most maximalist solution to this problem of leaks. You could imagine something more surgical where you are using leak detectors to figure out where the leaks are, or robots that go in the pipes, those exist also. And then only repairing the sections that need repair, or you can line the old pipes with plastic pipes on the inside. There's a lot of much cheaper ways to do it, but the utilities don't make nearly as much profit off of those ways. So they have a preference for the most expensive thing, which is to completely replace all of the old metal pipes in the entire state and across the country. It's happening everywhere with old pipes, that is. So that's what leak-prone pipes are and what it means to replace them. You'll hear the term replacement versus repair. They sound really similar, but they mean very different things. Okay, so just to give you a flavor for just how prevalent this is in New York State right now, all this stuff is paid for by your gas bills. Whenever you hear ratepayer, that just means electric or gas bill. And in 2022 and 23, we spent a little bit over $1 billion on things like heat pumps or improving building envelopes or even gas efficiency, where we are giving people new gas furnaces. So these are all the different energy efficiency interventions that lower gas consumption, essentially. So we spent $1 billion of your energy bills on reducing methane, basically burning methane. And we spent nearly twice as much replacing pipes for a system that, if you read pretty much any scenario study, has to be shut down in the next 3 decades for us to meet our climate goals. So twice as much on simply buttressing the existing system rather than getting us off of it. And we know that the utilities want to replace all of this pipe over the next few decades, and that's because our Public Service Commission has ordered them to do that. And so they've all published, most of them have said, here's our last date of when we'll be doing this. But before we talk about when it'll be happening, we should just figure out how much there is out there. So this is the total amount of distribution pipe in the ground in the whole state. It's about 50,000 miles. The color breakdown is just what utility has the pipe. But what we're looking at is the 7,000 miles of that 50 that is considered leak prone, which is just, again, to say made of old metal. So whatever 7 divided by 49 is, I think it's like 15% of all of the gas mains under your block are of this type of pipe. So now we can get to how long is it going to take to replace all the stuff. The dashed line, so the x-axis is years from next year till 2050. The dashed lines are the year that each utility has said that they think they'll wrap up all their replacements by. And the y-axis is how many miles total statewide of leak-prone pipe are planned to be replaced that year. So this is the plan. It's heaviest right now, and then as utilities finish up their piece of the puzzle, they stop replacing, and the amount of that we're replacing every year goes down and down and down. And really, pretty much everybody is done after 2040, other than National Grid in New York City and Long Island. They take an extra decade, according to the current plan. So this is the plan. The next question is, how much will this all cost to do if they actually go through with it? I will go into how exactly we figured this out, but I'll just kind of spoil it. The answer is it really, really depends. And the reason is that pipe replacement is getting more expensive all the time. It's getting more expensive faster than inflation. So it's not just like general inflation. It's for whatever reason, this sector gets more expensive to do. But nobody knows just how much more expensive it's going to get over the next 3 decades. There's a bunch of estimates out there. The lowest one we saw was 3%. The most aggressive one we saw was 10%. And so we are, rather than picking a number, we're looking at all the possible futures. So let's look at the dark line for a second. That dark line is kind of our middle scenario for the amount of spending by all the utilities every year to do all those replacements. So it's this previous chart, this is the plan, this is how much the plan is going to cost. And the reason there's a cloud there instead of just the single line is because we don't know how much more expensive this is going to get over time. And so we wanted to capture that uncertainty. But what you see here is basically, you know, it'll range between $1.5 billion a year to over, you know, between $2 and $2.5 billion. So there's uncertainty, but we're pretty sure it's a whole lot of money. And we're pretty sure it is at least 50%, if not more, than they're spending right now on reducing gas consumption. So it's a ton of money. And just to remind you, this is all going to be paid for by your gas bills. They'll raise them over time to pay themselves back for doing this. This is the yearly amount they're spending, but total, so yes, it's about 1.6 billion a year. Total, the middle scenario is we think it'll be $43 billion from now until 2050. And the total range is anywhere between $34 to $65 billion. So big number. Okay, I'm going to keep going and then I'll take some questions. So you might be wondering, it seems a little absurd to be plowing this much money into a system that we need to shut down. And it's, you know, even if you're not the kind of person who is that fired up about shutting down the gas system, it's worth noting that the amount of gas that homes and small businesses consume in New York State has dropped by 13% in the last 5 years, which is a ton. If they keep that up, then we're going to have a whole financial crisis just because people are stopping to consume the gas. So it's a system that is already starting to be underused, and they're putting more money into it rather than shutting it down. That's what this means. Okay, so could we avoid that whole scenario? We think we can, and that's the whole point of our report, is to get a feel for how much of the money could be saved if we went another way. And the other way is doing what's called targeted electrification. So this block is scheduled to have its pipes replaced, let's say, in 5 years. What if instead of doing that, we spent some money on giving all those folks heat pumps and induction stoves and all electric appliances? That way, you can safely or practically shut down the pipe without having anybody unable to heat their home or their food or their water. Our study didn't just look at the cost to give people all these free appliances, but also of insulating and sealing the homes when they needed that to bring their bills down after moving to heat pumps. And we even factored in how much it's going to cost to upgrade the local distribution electric lines, because this will mean we'll need to have more electricity going to these homes. But in many cases, as you'll see, in about half the cases, it's cheaper to do this. Even though it sounds expensive, it is in some cases far, far cheaper to do this just because replacing pipe underground is so expensive. All right. But there's a sort of an in-between question before I can tell you, you know, of the plan, how much of it can we electrify instead? There's a kind of a tricky question here, which is if you imagine that pipe segment that we just saw is on the way to other pipe that's newer. If you turn it off, you're going to strand everybody that's sort of downstream of that pipe that isn't scheduled, that maybe doesn't have leak-prone pipe or isn't scheduled to be replaced. So this is called Decommissioning just means shutting it down. And the question is, how much of it is hydrologically feasible to shut down? In other words, what can you safely shut down without causing problems elsewhere in the pipe network? The short answer is we have no idea because the utilities haven't told us. So we took a principled guesstimate. We looked at a range between what if it's 10%, only 10% that can be shut down with no problems, and what if it's 50%? And the 50% comes from California, where the gas utility, or one of the big gas utilities over there, that's what they say they can do. So it's sort of like a principled guesstimate. This is the scenario where it turns out to be 30% of all the pipes you can safely shut down right now. And so that's what I'm going to show you, but the study looked at all possible futures. Okay, so this is sort of secondary question of how much of it can we shut down? And once we have that, the question is, how much of that stuff is it cost effective to electrify instead? So we know that there's about a third of the miles out there, let's say, we can maybe electrify, but when is it cheaper to electrify? And we estimate it's cheaper this much of the time. So initially it's only cheaper about half the time, but it gets better over time. So as you can see, the green chunk is much smaller than the gray chunk. And part of what we need to do is make the green chunk bigger. But let's say we do this very conservative thing, and we'll still do the gray, we'll still do the light green, but we won't do the dark green, and instead we'll give those folks heat pumps. What would we get if we did that? The result would be we would avoid $4.6 billion in leak-prone pipe replacement. That's pure savings, even after you account for the cost of giving people heat pumps and weatherizing their homes and such. And you would end up electrifying 300,000 households, which is about 6% of all the gas-heated households. So it's a start, perhaps not earth-shattering, but doing NPAs at this level is 10 times more easily than what we're currently doing. All right, so I'm gonna stop for questions now, and then we'll go into the deep dive section after first round of clarification questions.
That's great. There's a question from Joanne about the weatherization of these older homes where these old pipes are. You see that, Joanne Boger?
I don't have the chat in front of me.
Okay. Joanne says leak-prone pipe implies old houses too. These are usually hard to insulate. To really get energy efficiency, old houses need new envelopes, including walls/siding. How much money is estimated for full weatherization?
It depends, which is always the annoying answer to these types of questions. But the range is anywhere between 10 to 20, depending on what the house needs. And our simulation kind of accounts for that. It says, oh, this is a particularly complicated home, so it's going to cost more because we have to, do drill and fill insulation on the walls and do air sealing and whatnot. And then other ones will be a lot more straightforward than that. And we have sort of the full spectrum. So, but the range is often like 10 to 20. And I'd say and the model suggests that about half of the homes in New York State need to weatherize to avoid their bills going up when they get heat pumps, or put more positively, to have their bills go down with heat pumps. And we only weatherize those homes, not the ones that will save money regardless.
Okay, Simon says, why does it have to be cheaper to electrify than replace leak-prone pipe? How would you compare the future cost to customers of maintaining a waning gas distribution network?
Love this question, and it's the subject of the next section, so we'll hop there real quick. So could we do better than this? I think we can, starting by maybe not thinking that cost effectiveness is the most important thing in the world. First of all, the places where it's not cost effective, it's usually not off by that much, as we'll see later in the presentation. And second of all, it's a very different kind of investment, replacing pipe that you're going to need to shut down that is already being underused. and making homes more comfortable, electrifying them. Like one is an investment in the future, one is accelerating our decarbonization efforts. The other is, in a way, taking the money and lighting it on fire. Especially because there are much cheaper ways to solve the immediate problem, which is plugging the leaks. So we looked at cost effectiveness only because that's what the regulators are going to want to know. But I think it's an important point that it might not be the right comparison. And we had a very, very conservative estimate of the cost because we're only looking at the upfront cost and not the cost to like decommission and maintain the pipes over their life, which would probably make the dark blue consume the dark green consume the light green. In other words, make probably most electrification cost effective.
Actually, that relates to Polly's question, which is how soon when pipeline is installed as part of a plan until it needs to be replaced again. So thinking about what happens next.
It's a great question. I think it's about, for the plastic ones, I think it's about 50, 60 years, is my understanding, but I'm sure somebody on the call might know more about that than me. So if you do, please shout. Any other questions?
We've been debating in the docket, so whether the gas companies should be allowed to depreciate their pipes over 80 years or whether they should all have to go to 50 years. And I don't know where it stands right now. Probably Jessica knows. Oh, Anne is asking my favorite question in the world. Are there maps where pipes have already been replaced or need to be replaced?
There are absolutely maps, and only utilities have them. And when you ask for them, either as an advocate, so it wouldn't be necessarily public, but it would be for those people who are working on a docket, or aggregated, where it's like, okay, I don't need to know exactly where the pipe is, but tell me like of the, how many miles of pipe there are in this neighborhood, and of those, how many are leak prone, and when do they need to be replaced? They have a whole song and dance about how it's a national security threat. And that's what they always use to push back. The hope is that reports like these make it extremely clear how important it is to have a sense of this question, because that's the biggest source of uncertainty in the whole thing, is how much could we actually shut down right now?
Great.
Any other questions?
There's a lot of chat saying Energy wants to introduce legislation that would require those maps to be disclosed. Wouldn't that be nice? And Bill comments that the plastic pipes are warranted for 50 to 55 years, but they are likely to last much longer than that. That's right. They're quite long lasting, which is one reason we use them. All right, let's move on to Juan-Pablo. You have more to present, right? And then we can go to the end. And I'll just tee up that Jared wants the number to text your assembly member about New York Heat. He is anticipating what we're going to do at the end. But Jared, if you can't wait till the end, I can share it in the chat now. Okay, let's go. Let's continue on. And Juan-Pablo, back to you.
Yep. So here's a second thing I think we need to do is make a lot more, first of all, get some transparency on how many of these pipes we could actually shut down today without screwing up the rest of the system. And second of all, whatever that level is, making it as high as possible. How do you do that? Well, there's upstream pipe, there's the old pipe, there's downstream pipe. If the reason you can't shut down the pipe in the middle is because it'll affect things downstream, then proactively decommission the stuff downstream in the years before you're scheduled to remove the old pipe. And this is completely a policy question. It's completely within the power of the Public Service Commission to do that. And in fact, if you look at all scenarios of how quickly we need to shut down the gas system, remember we have 50,000 miles of gas. This gray lump here is only 7,000. So actually we need to be shutting it down much, much faster than even all the gray. So avoiding the gray is like absolute table stakes. It's only about 15% of the problem, and we're not even close to solving 15% of the problem right now. But that's why we need New York heat, because if you want to do this, you currently can't. Even if it's much better to have an induction stove and everybody would love it and everything else, if there's one person who still wants gas on that block, it kills the whole project. So that's the biggest reason for the biggest way in which New York heat would help unlock all this future. But the other big one is, it gets things moving. It says, okay, we're serious now. Let's figure this out. Let's make the green go up, essentially. And by the way, if you made it so that 90% of the gray, in other words, 90% of all these miles that were scheduled to be replaced could be decommissioned and were decommissioned, and you gave those people heat pumps, that would be almost 1 in 5 households that are currently on the gas system. So that's now a pretty serious chunk of the problem. Okay, so these are some deep dives that I'll go through a little bit faster. But we have that big number of like how much it's going to cost overall to do all this LPP replacement. This is how we calculated it. You need to know how many miles of leak-prone pipe there are in each utility and how much it costs to replace each mile in that utility. It's not at all an evenly distributed problem. Almost all of this pipe that we're talking about is in either Buffalo or New York Metro, because those were built out first. They have the oldest pipe. So you see here, National Grid Long Island, Con Ed, National Grid NYC, National Fuel. Those have the majority of the leak-prone pipe miles, because the y-axis here is how many miles we think that they have. National Grid alone is like over half of all the miles out there. And then the surprising thing is that we really weren't expecting was that how much it costs to replace each mile varies dramatically depending on where you are in the state. So the cheapest one is National Fuel at $800,000 per mile. That's like cheap. Cost per mile is on the y-axis. Then a lot of the other utilities, the upstate utilities, are in the neighborhood of $1.6 to $3 million per mile. The only one that's not upstate is National Grid Long Island. And then you get Con Ed, which is almost double that. And then you get National Grid New York City, which is almost double that. It kind of makes sense that it would be more expensive to build in New York City, but why is it almost twice as expensive to build in one part of New York City versus the other? That's a bit of a mystery that we haven't figured out. But this is why it ends up being cheaper to do target electrification. That's a chunk of change for electrifying for replacing the pipes that serve a few hundred customers. Another question is, where exactly is target electrification cheaper than replacing the pipes? Because I gave you the green wedge, but I didn't break it down by different areas, so we'll do that next. So we're going to compare the cost to replace the pipe for a single household compared to electrifying that household. In RG&E, in Rochester Gas and Electric, up in Rochester, the cost per household is $55,000. So that means if you take a mile, you know how much it's going to cost to replace, and you know roughly how many households there are being served by that mile, and you divide, this is what you get. Compared to electrifying those households is only about a little less than 30 per household. And then it kind of goes from there. So a lot of the upstate, so you've got like NYSEG and Orange and Rockland. Upstate, it is much more expensive to replace the pipes than it is to electrify. By the time you get to National Grid Long Island, they're closer together, but it's still cheaper to electrify. And the reason why is because you saw how expensive it was to electrify, to decommission the pipe in National Grid's New York territory. Central Hudson and National Grid Upstate are pretty much break even. And then Con Ed and National Fuel are the exceptions where it is significantly, well, not even that significantly, it's like 50 to 70% more expensive to electrify each household than it is to replace the pipe. Any questions on this?
How much more do you have to go? I'm just trying to gauge the time. There are definitely questions.
Not very much.
Why don't you just finish up and
Okay.
take the questions then?
One more thing to say here. Con Ed and National Fuel are not cost effective, but for completely opposite reasons. So in Con Ed, in National Fuel, the reason is that it's very cheap to replace those pipes. In Con Ed, it's not cheap. It's the second most expensive, but there's a lot of customers served by any given mile of pipe. And so it ends up being more expensive to electrify them. Just a point, which is that this picture changes over time. What I was showing you here is just the current situation this year. By 2030, though, Central Hudson and National Grid Upstate will be cost effective. I can toggle back and forth. And what you see is that everything's getting more expensive, but LPP replacement is getting more expensive much faster than electrification. And that's why those two utilities tip over into being cost effective. Although again, I'm not convinced cost effectiveness is like the be all end all thing to think about here, but there it is. And this is just showing the savings over time. So as we do these non-pipeline alternatives and we give people heat pumps, this is the money that we are not spending as a result, and how it's cumulative. So it's like how it adds up over time, so that it would be $75 million next year, and then by the end of the next few decades, it would be that $4 billion that I talked about earlier. Yep, and that's it for the presentation.
Amazing. Let's unshare the screen and we'll take the questions. There's quite a few here in the chat.
Lisa,
So-
before you jump into questions, I want to ask Juan-Pablo to share one clarifying piece. So Juan-Pablo, you just showed some charts showing kind of aggregates for utility territories and what's cost effective at this time or in the future, but that doesn't mean there aren't cost effective projects within each territory, right?
Exactly. So let's say.
So it doesn't mean that no project in Con Ed or no project in National Fuel territory is going to be cheaper to electrify.
Yeah, we had to do this. We had to really zoom out to do this analysis because the numbers that they make public are only for the entire utility territory. So we know how many miles there are in the utility territory. We know the average cost per mile, and our model tells us how much it'll cost to electrify homes in that part of the state. And then we do some division and we get one number for these very large geographical areas. But of course, some parts are more expensive to do the replacements than others, and other parts are denser than others. So they'll have more or less households served by pipe. And as we saw, that's a lot of what drives whether it's cost effective or not. So really what we should be doing is looking much more in detail and having a detailed map where it's like, which part of each utility's territory would it be cost effective? So this is a limitation of the analysis where Con Ed, right? It's never cost effective. So we never do those projects in their simulation. That's why there was so much gray at the beginning, because a lot of the pipes are in Con Ed and we never do target electrification. But surely in Westchester, there are parts in Con Ed's territory where it's already cost effective. But we just can't see in that much detail because, again, there's very little information to go on.
And Con Ed is doing projects and has already identified lots of cost-effective areas. So we know that this is possible. It's just getting those detailed maps is so important.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification. So Andy asks, why would gas-only utilities pay for home electrification instead of leak-prone pipe replacement? Related, where will the money come from for home electrification? And this gets at the issue of gas utilities being separate from electric utilities.
So at a high level, what we're saying here is rather than raising your bills a lot to replace some pipes, let's raise them less and give the people who would be affected by the pipe removal free stuff. So one way to pay for it is you're still raising gas rates. You're just raising them by less. The problem with that is you want to shut down the gas system as you electrify folks so that you don't get the death spiral where you have fewer and fewer people paying for the same amount of infrastructure. And this does that. This actually shuts down the infrastructure as you electrify pretty much by definition. But if you're still paying for it out of people's gas bills, then you still have that same death spiral. It just happens more slowly. So what are the other options? The other options are electrical utilities, because they're benefiting, right? They're getting more customers. And then tax dollars. That's pretty much the money. There are trade-offs for all of them. Nobody quite knows what the answer is at the moment. And it really depends on where you are. If you're Con Ed and your electric business overlaps with your gas territory and you care more about your electric business, this is great. It just means you get to shut down one system and grow the other one. If you're National Fuel and you're a gas-only utility, this is not so great for you unless you decide to do, for instance, geothermal. Because there's a whole way to do this. We're sort of assuming in our analysis that everyone's just getting their own air source heat pumps, but you could also have the utility actually be the one doing the replacement if rather than being people who lay down pipes for gas, they become people who lay down pipes for geothermal, and then they don't lose any customers.
And if
We didn't do the analysis assuming those costs though.
Okay, we're gonna we're almost out of time, and we need time for the take action. So I'm being a little strict. Eddie asks, you mentioned that the utilities prefer large capital projects. Are there ideas for changing that incentive? In other words, utilities make money by doing these capital projects. Is there any thought about how to change that whole system?
This is one for Jessica.
Okay, I love the questions you all are asking, and these are big questions that are being grappled with in Public Service Commission proceedings, which is why, getting involved in the gas planning docket, I can see all of your gears turning, right? So there are all of these questions about, which utilities pay for the transition. Right now, it's gas utilities. When we do non-pipe alternatives, those are gas utility projects, and they are paid for by gas utilities with avoided costs of gas infrastructure. But thinking about how we integrate the planning and integrate electric utilities is part of the planning process, right? So, and questions about can we change incentive structures for utilities are also, something we need to grapple with in the gas planning docket. So I would very much encourage folks to get involved in gas planning, and, you can contact me to talk more about how to do that. But we have to change our planning processes and our utility regulation in order to unlock this future that is so possible and this opportunity of saving so much money and electrifying customers.
So I think Jessica's saying not only do we have to pass the New York Heat Act, but then we have to really hone in on the gas planning and rate cases, work with the Public Service Commission, which is definitely some work that Renewable Heat Now has always worked on and wants to get back to working on more. So Lorenzo, could you please share the take action slide with everybody? I'm going to put a link in the chat. We really, as you can see, there's lots of benefits. It doesn't have to just be that it saves money, but obviously that's our sort of our best argument. Yep, Kim, I'm doing it. So we have a bunch of take actions for you. And Lorenzo, if you could make that full screen, that would be great. So right now, the key is to get the New York Heat Act passed. And we have a call relay going on. It started yesterday. It's continuing on today and tomorrow, and there's still plenty of slots left. And we would love you to sign up to be part of this call relay. Of course, you can make calls on your own, but it's really fun to be a part of a communal call relay. And you make your calls, and then you text the next person, you put your notes, and you can see everybody making their calls. And it's just more fun than doing it by yourself. But we also have a bunch of other stuff we would love for you to do. And it's all neatly contained in our link tree, which is a great thing to bookmark on your computer or your, and also you can always find it on Renewable Heat Now's Instagram in the bio. So in there you will find the link to the tool to make a call and send an email to your assembly member, Governor Hochul and Carl Hastie. And we also have a bunch of upcoming events that we invite you to join. So for those of you in National Grid downstate territory, they are doing gas planning, long-term gas planning now. And Sane Energy Project is hosting a great event where you can be part of one of the hearings. The hearings are going to be online on Zoom on the 10th, the 16th, and the 17th of this month, 2 each day, one during the day and one in the evening. But Sane Energy is hosting an in-person event for folks to gather together and sort of do this communally and be part of this hearing. And they're going to have a teach-in to sort of explain that and give you all the talking points. The sign up for that is also in the link tree. We have our monthly power hour where you get updates on all of our campaign activities and how to take action. On the 17th, the Zoom sign up for that is it's in the link tree, Mary. The sign up is for that is in the link tree. We are participating in the Earth Day Rally and Lobby Day and the Earth Day Lobby Day in Albany on April 29th with Clean and Healthy and a bunch of other groups. And there's going to be an Earth Day rally for New York Heat in New York City on April 22nd. That's the only one that I don't have a link for yet, but just save the date. It is going to be during the day, I believe, on April 22nd on Earth Day. So unfortunately, we are out of time, but keep putting your questions in the chat and we will put them in a document and make sure that they get answered and emailed out to you, because I know there's a lot of questions here. I'm going to answer to Mark. A lot of people are confused about this. They think if their assembly member or senator is already a sponsor or supporter of New York Heat, they don't need to call. That is the opposite of true. If they are already a sponsor or a supporter of New York Heat, they're the ones we need to call the most, because they're the ones who, if anyone's going to fight for New York Heat to pass, it's them. Our opponents are not going to fight for this bill. And there's a lot of bills competing for people's time and a lot of important bills competing for people's time and energy. So imagine you're an assembly member and you have 10 bills you want to see passed and you have one chance to talk to Speaker Hastie about it. We want New York Heat to be in your top of mind when you're speaking to Hastie, because let's face it, there's a lot of stuff happening in the world. So those are the people you need to bug. Our opponents are probably not going to, at this point, after 3 years, become supporters of New York Heat and help us pass it. Yes, call them too, but mostly call our supporters, especially in the Assembly. The Senate is very supportive of this bill and wants to see it passed this year in the budget. The Assembly has fought it being a budget bill for 3 years in a row, and this year they really need to hear your outrage about how our money is being spent on gas pipelines instead of renewable energy and energy efficient solutions. So that's where we'll finish up here. Thanks so much to our speakers. Thank you so much for commissioning this report, Jessica and Juan-Pablo, for doing the work, for these great presentations. I know we could continue to chat about all of this for at least a few more hours, but we don't have that time today. And thank you everybody so much. Mary, the link tree, I'm putting it in the chat here. And you want to, all the links are there. So the Power Hour sign up, the call, everything except the phone relay, which I also put
I
in the
already
chat.
did the phone relay twice. I'm doing it tomorrow too, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. Everything else is there except the Earth Day thing on the 22nd, which will be emailed to you. If you signed up for this, you will get that emailed to you. So thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for the great questions. We're going to make sure we save the chat and get all those questions answered that we couldn't get to today. So keep calling, keep agitating. That's the only way we're going to break through. Thank you very much. And look forward to our next teach-in. We're going to have a teach-in later this month on gas stoves and the health impacts of burning gas to cook your food inside your house, and some legislation that is going to require gas stoves to be fixed with a warning label. And that's going to be with Assemblymember Szalages and famous actor and climate leader Tim Guinea. So you'll look forward to that later this month. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.